actually commencing with that pilot to bring people into the designation framework. Sharon, I hope I haven't taken the words out of your mouth or put the words into your mouth.
I'm sorry, we missed that because we had load shedding.
Oh, God. All right, well, you'll hear the recording, I hope.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's very good news. You know, what I like about your approach and what you've explained to us, that it's going to be very practical. You know, I think it's one of the areas that I've been talking about RPL on a theoretical level, but put RPL into practice, like you're saying, taking one designation and put one individual, take John and course you through that RPL process. I think that will add tremendous value.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right. So moving on. Number 4, to collaborate with the relevant Quality Council, especially Quality Council for Trade and Occupations, to ensure quality and provision of learning programs. Now, this is when it gets insidious. And what I mean by that, I mean that this document makes it very clear that CETAs are no longer ETQAs, and that the CETAs now have to be taking the ETQA budget they might have had up until now and be passing that budget over to the Quality Council for Trade and Occupation so that the Quality Councils for Trade and Occupation can get the funding they need to perform the services that previously were being performed by the CETAs. So without consulting, if you want, with organized business that is paying the skills levy, what is now happening is that a state institution such as the QCTO Council that should be funded directly through the fiscus, through the Department of Higher Education and Training, is now exclusively going to be funded out of the skills levies paid by the business community. So business is going to build state institutions instead of using the skills levy for the purpose it was originally designed for, which is namely for the purposes of actually training more and more 18.2 people and creating labor pools for people to come into the world of work. And business, the organized business community at NEDLAC have agreed to doing this. So the people representing your businesses, the members of the Employer Association at NEDLAC, have said that business has mandated that business will now fund government departments such as the QCTO and agree to relinquish entitlement to the funding for purposes of learnerships, internships, and training people in the world of work, and also new pools of candidates to come into the world of work. And there's not been a word said by business in opposing that objective. Any comments on that? Okay, let's move on. So I'm not going through the usual gumph, except to say that CETAs can facilitate and broker the linkages between the labor market, employers, and the sector with the education and training institutional supply. That becomes, if you want, the main job of CETAs now. CETAs are there to take the workplace skills plans which identify gaps and to force companies to take the supply of trained people from the public technical vocational education training institutions and the public university system. Essentially, that is the objective of this new national skills strategy. To say that CETAs now are responsible for creating the pathway from the public universities, colleges, and educational training colleges into the world of work using the sector skill plans for that purpose. And again, business has not said, but hold on a moment, what about protecting the right of the private training providers who we are more comfortable getting services from? What about protecting their rights to be able to along the same pathways into the world of work? And so because no one has cried out in favor of that community of interest, Gerard, your company, has fallen by the wayside as a priority in these regulations and this legislation. And not a word has been uttered in that regard. Can you explain that to me, Gerard? Sorry, I know I'm putting you on the spot, but are you as incensed as I am by that?
Yeah, I think it is pretty shocking. It's Yeah, to me, I think all that's happening at the moment is that the NSF, like you said, the fund will get divided into more and more little bits and pieces, and I think the value of business and private sector is completely underestimated. So I think it's pretty shocking.
All right. Can I ask you, Sharon, having been involved through the CCMG and then the professional body in at least NSDS 3, if not NSDS 2, has there been an engagement on behalf of the contact center sector with the Department of Higher Education and Training, Department of Trade and Industries, to say, look, our members predominantly get their training from the private education sector. We'd like to keep it that way, and we will oppose legislation that forces our member companies to have to buy their training from public institutions. Has any of that engagement taken place?
No, Ivor, unfortunately, none of that has happened.
That has to be a priority, Sharon, because otherwise you're going to have a scenario where the only pivotal grants which are going to be given out by CETAs will be to companies that say, we're prepared to take new people into learnerships and internships, but it can only be from the public institutions. And therefore, the guys such as Gerard that are doing the work that they're doing will not be entitled to get CETA funding, pivotal funding, or national skills funding for doing the work that they're currently doing in the sector, in the industry. Or, and this is a big or, but it's an important or, Sharon, or we have to get in the employer association, the member companies, to agree that we can approach the technical vocational education training colleges and the public universities and say to them, if you engage with us in a partnership, then we will encourage our member companies to employ people coming out of the public institutions. So Gerard, I'm sorry that I'm mentioning it publicly, but it's either or. It's either that your clients want to support the notion that private training providers are important, or it's that your clients and the members of the employer association say it's in our better interests to go with the public institutions, but to force them to train the way we want to see training taking place, subsidized by the Department of Higher Education and Training.
Yeah, I thank you for mentioning that. You know, again, as a member of the Employers Association, we're very concerned about it. Just something that might come up in your presentation a little bit later is the alignment of the codes, the BEE codes the BEE codes, skills development specifically, and the NSDS 4. Because I mean, from a training company perspective, training provider perspective, at the moment, I must tell you, 80% of training spend are being aligned to the BE codes of conduct, in line with skills development, in order to try and get through this massive workload of gaining BE points at huge costs. So, yeah, to me, it's a bit of a concern. But yeah, I think that will most probably come up in your presentation a bit later.
All right, so let's move on. Sharon, I don't know if you've got anything to say in that regard before I move on.
We've had this discussion before, and the concern in the industry is the quality of the training if we leave it to government, to their universities and that. Are they going to train what we actually need? Do they understand it? And then in your or scenario, what they should be doing, if that is how we're going, is they need to then partner with the likes of Gerard and eStudy and to make sure that they've got the right stuff that they need to train.
Gerard, are you currently partnering with any TVET?
No, we're not. We're not partnering with any TVET colleges as such, neither any university. We are, however, very strong on the internship level, specifically for postgraduates. But of course, we do not rely on government funding through CETA grants and those kind of things. But if you look at the contribution of a typical postgraduate as opposed to a typical NQF level 4 learnership kind of project, the value add component in internships is a lot. It's 10 times higher than the conventional stuff. So in many cases, cases, employers simply make peace with the fact that they're not going to get CETA grants and those kind of support from government. Just do it internally.
I'm going to play devil's advocate just for a moment, and I'm going to say this, that, Gerard, you need to acknowledge that it's not just the 1% skills levy which is at stake here, but in fact it is also the 5% additional that has to be spent on skills development for triple BE purposes. Because if there is a recognition problem in terms of the 1%, that same problem will relate to the other 5% of expenditure, where if it's to a company's advantage because they're getting better point recognition by doing business, by buying their training from public institutions, they're going to be very hard pressed to want to buy training from you where they're going to have to pay for their training and not have it acknowledged as skills development spend, except in the last 2 or 3 categories where they can spend 15% of their budget with you instead of the whole budget. So I'm saying it goes beyond the 1% skills levy that you have to be taking cognizance of.
Yes, I fully agree with you, Ivor. I think all training providers in the country will have to go back to the drawing board and just see, what legislation is coming up.
Sharon, I think it would be necessary maybe to call a meeting of training providers as a webinar and to have this discussion. Gerard, would you agree?
Yeah, and I think there's a huge need for that, just to try and coordinate voices, because we're all individually scattered all over the country. And certainly Employers Association could play a critical role in doing that.
All right. Sharon, anything from your side?
No, noted, Ivor. Yes, I do agree. We can have a webinar with all the training providers. We haven't spoken to them in a while, so it is time to get back to them.
All right, good. Okay, so let's move on. Now, guys, ladies and gentlemen, the next point is critically important. The National Growth Plan calls for increased workplace training of workers already in employment in order to improve productivity and the overall growth. In other words, this is your 18.1 training and development of your existing workforce. To address this challenge, the mandatory grant, discretionary grant, and administration budgets of CETAs will be reviewed as CETAs are required to support employed workers. Now, this is brilliant. This is a very positive step. What it means is that CETAs must support the training of employed workers and encourage employers to expand such training in order to improve the overall productivity of the economy, achieve transformation and address skill imbalances in our workforce, in particular, and the labor market in general. Now that's very good. That's very, very interesting. There's a table which, by the way, is wrong if you look at their columns, but this is the table that they include showing workplace transformation at the various levels. You can see here, for example, in 2001, at the lowest level, 58% of African people were being trained, or rather transformation taking place at that level. It increased to 61%. 18% went down to 11% in the colored community. Indian community, it went down slightly. It went down throughout except in the African area. And it went up, funnily enough, at the technical level in the white area, which is quite surprising, and I suppose has more to do with traditional tradespeople coming through the systems. But if you look at top management, there were significant changes. I mean, in the African category, it went down from 87 to 67% in the white community. It more than doubled in the African community. It more than doubled in the colored community. It went up disproportionately high in the Indian community, as you can see there. It went up from 4% to nearly 10%, which was quite interesting. And then from a gender point of view, it went down for males, but it almost
think we've lost you. Either that or I'm busy failing.
Yeah, we also lost Ivor. We can't hear him.
Same on this side.
I'm going to check in with you quickly to see.
Hello.
Oh.
Hello.
Hello, you back?
Yeah, Sharon, I don't know what happened there, but am I back?
You are back, yeah.
Okay. All right. So what I was saying is that this workforce transformation from 2001 to 2017 is most probably an indicator, the most important indicator of what is going to be happening in the discussion which is going to lead up to the third triple BE scorecard, which is expected to be finalized by 2023. Because these trends, particularly in the colored and Indian communities and in the female communities, will determine just how much of the African community needs to be propped up in the new triple BE scorecard, where you're not seeing enough of an effect, particularly at the senior management and particularly at the professionally qualified levels. Sharon, from your point of view, this professionally qualified category is the most important category for how you determine your strategic pathway for the next 5 years. It's very important that you react to these trends here, which are essentially telling you that there's not been enough movement in the African community, there's been good movement in the colored community, good movement in the Indian community, and there's been downward movement in the white community. So while all the movement is right, it's not been benefiting the African community. And that is something that you have to respond to via the professional body and also via the employer association. Any comments in that regard, Sharon?
I must say, Ivor, our stats look very different to what they have there. Really, when we have a look at the African community in contact centers, the scores are incredibly high. So that's really good to see. And one that is depicted by them is the higher number of percentage for females. And that is right in our industry. So we're probably doing a little better on African. Obviously, then it's regionalized as well, whereas we have more coloreds in Cape Town. But as an overall, doing very well there and doing very well on the females.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
Yes, I attended the annual conference of the BEE Commission last week. And I must just congratulate the BEE Commission on an excellent conference. It was really, really valuable overall. And I think the numbers, the sudden increase or the recent increase in Indian people moving up into top management structure, I think correlates with what the Commissioner also confirmed. And secondly, the low percentage of African people moving into top management, senior management, I think is also low, which I quickly see in these statistics are more or less the same. So I think there are some synergies in terms of trends. Let's see what the future holds.
All right, moving on. Thank you. Okay, South Africa's intermediate skill base too low to support the country's socio-economic development goals. To address this, the Quality Council for Trade and Occupation has been developing new occupational qualifications which will become part of an important part of the offering in TVET colleges and CET colleges. So these are public, technical, vocational, and community colleges. And you can see here, this is a strategic priority which this National Skills Development Plan places on the Council for Trade and Occupation, developing and handing over the qualifications which can be run with by the TVET and the CET colleges. Now, why is this important? It's important because, and I say this to you as well, Sharon, it's important because when you're asked to participate or send subject matter experts to participate in QCTO development processes, you need to be fully cognizant of the fact that you're being asked to hand over the IP which currently resides in the private training provider fraternity in your sector to public institutions, so that those public institutions can be preferred over the private training provider institutions in terms of how this particular national skills strategy and future national skills strategies are going to be interpreted. It's critically important that you understand that. And I know I'm sounding like a naysayer. I'm intentionally sounding like a naysayer to urge you to be cautious when sending subject matter experts to participate in building qualifications for the QCTO that will eventually be used to undermine the existing training provider base that your members currently rely on, both internal and external, within the contact center sector. Very important. Any comments in that regard?
That's scary. They'll lynch us.
Yeah. No, that is very scary. You know, I didn't read the sentence in that way, and didn't see it in that context. But certainly, yeah, that's what's implied in future.
I would say to you that if you're invited to participate in QCTO activities, you need a direct confirmation from the Department of Higher Education and Training that participating in that way will not prejudice the existing training providers that are participating with the industry, and not force your members to deal on a preferential basis in procuring training services only from public institutions. Tyrone, I saw that your microphone wiggled a little bit. Do you want to say something?
Oh, no, the button pressed. Sorry about that.
Okay. All right. So, Sharon, that's very, very important. I think you need that undertaking in writing from the Department of Higher Education and Training, that if you're being asked to participate with the QCTO, that you have an absolute undertaking that the private training provider fraternity upon which your members currently depend for their training services will not be disadvantaged to the extent that they will be marginalized out of the value chain of where your members can procure their training services from.
Thanks, Ava. Noted.
Gerard, would you agree with that?
I fully agree with that. Yeah, and I think as a training provider, we will certainly look forward to the increasing contribution of professional organizations in order to work towards the best interest of business.
All right, good. So moving on. Skills Levy institutions, through their funding, will play an important role in supporting the increased production of occupationally directed programs. The system requires better and more systemic arrangements for workplace-based learning in order for the programs to inspire confidence amongst employers and to improve employment outcomes for students. Very important. And again, Sharon, you wear two hats. Your one hat is towards your training private provider network, who are also members. And your other hat is towards being, I don't know what the term is, but towards being able to, on a neutral basis, negotiate the best deal from public training providers for your members, which might be a cheaper deal, but a deal based on the same qualifications and the same outcomes. And I'm not saying that's possible, but I'm saying you need to bounce both of those balls in the air as you go about positioning the private training providers, but also your relationship with the public training providers. The growth of stronger TVET colleges will expand the provision of mid-level technical and occupational qualifications. These will articulate directly into the world of work for the growing number of young people leaving the schooling system. In other words, the idea is that government will support the notion and encourage companies to take their graduates from the public university system and the public TVET system, where you see a significantly expanded TVET institutional type, relieving the higher education institutional type, which is already under strain from high demand. So that's the plan for the technical vocational colleges, those 60 or 70 odd colleges out there. The question is, how does that leave the private training provider? And I don't believe there's been enough debate in that regard. Okay, moving on. So this is the new college type that's now been introduced. The CET, the Community Education and Training College type. And really, Stats South Africa estimate that more than 18 million people above 20 years have educational levels below the National Senior Certificate, and there are few opportunities for education and work for those people. So up to 18 million people are essentially unemployable because of the quality of their education. or because they haven't finished their national senior certificate. This includes more than 3.3 million young people between the ages of 15 to 24 and 4.6 between the ages of 25 to 34. They're not in education, they're not in employment or training, and that's by 2018. And people in rural areas who constitute the most marginalized. The aim, therefore, is to create a differentiated institutional type of college, and that's the community education training college, that caters to the varied needs of communities and individuals and societies. Programs that are responsive to the needs of communities and that enable individuals to find work, start businesses, and develop sustainable livelihoods and progress onto their education institutions will be offered in these colleges. They will also seek to assist community organizations, etc., to work together to develop the communities by building on existing. So Sharon, I'm going to say this to you. It is my view that what this plan does is, it doesn't say that these community education training colleges need to only be public institutions. And it might be very important to consider engaging with the Department of Higher Education and Training and getting from them a commitment that you will bring a list of private training providers who want to play in the CET space to them, which are accepted by your member companies.
Yep.
Any comments in this regard? Sharon?
Yes, I'm making notes of all of it. Yeah, that would be really nice, and that'll be good for our industry, because then we know we're using those subject matter experts and the knowledge that they have.
I agree. If I could make a comment there as well, Sharon, I think certainly, overall on the NSDS, there are certainly some areas of great concern, but I must also say there are some very positive aspects, and I think one of them is moving towards a higher emphasis and focus on workplace experience. In my opinion, and I'm a strong supporter of the 70-20-10 learning model, where 70% of learning takes place on the job, 20% through managers and mentors, and 10% through academic learning activities. So I think there are some strong points in the NSDS, but also some areas of concern. One of the issues that is a bit of a concern to me is the gap between the private sector, TVET, and CET colleges. I'm not sure that private sector understands the opportunities and also what is expected of them to actually provide workplace experience to the students and graduates coming out of these colleges. And maybe the Employers Association and even CCMG could play a more prominent role, or launch one or two initiatives to actually train and inform employers on opportunities, because there's certainly some positive aspects in the NSDS as well.
No, there are lots of positive aspects, Gerard, but this particular question is a different issue. This is a question of how do you feel about this statement? The National Development Plan mandates the public education training system to expand the college system with a focus on improving quality. How do you feel about the fact that this is a public sector education and training mandate that the National Development Plan gives, with no recognition of private training providers being able to run these CETs, these what are they called? The community education and training colleges?
Yeah, look, it's obviously shocking to me. I mean, I've never read the NSDS in this manner, and yet besides that, they still want to use